You can almost hear the sand grinding beneath the hooves of horses as they slow to a halt just outside the massive, sun-baked walls of a city whose name the world will one day almost forget. The gates loom high above you, carved with patterns worn smooth by centuries of wind and dust. It is late afternoon, the air heavy with heat, and somewhere in the distance you catch the smell of spices, cinnamon, cardamom, pepper, carried by traders who have crossed deserts that swallow men whole. Before you, a long line of merchants waits in silence, their goods wrapped in cloth to keep the prying eyes of competitors from knowing exactly what wealth they carry. The air is tense. Somewhere up ahead, negotiations are taking place. And it is here, in this moment, that the fate of an entire kingdom balances on the outcome of an agreement that might seem dull to anyone not paying attention. Welcome to History in Ashes, where we bring to light the stories that rarely make it into the glossy pages of history books. Here, we take the fragments, the overlooked records, the slow moments in time, and piece them together so you can see the great, unvarnished tapestry of our past. Today, we are venturing deep into the untold stories of Africa's great kingdoms, worlds of power, resilience, and survival that are too often reduced to a handful of names and dates. Before we go further, could you do me a favor? Scroll down to the comments and tell us where you are watching from and what time it is right now where you are. I always imagine someone listening to this while the sun is rising in one place and setting in another, and it makes this global campfire of history feel a little more real. And while you are down there, hit that subscribe button. If the kings and queens of these kingdoms could demand loyalty from thousands of miles away without even knowing your name, I think I can politely ask for yours with a single click. Besides, unlike ancient rulers, I am not taxing your grain supply, just your attention. The gates ahead begin to creak open, not all at once, but in a slow, deliberate way that makes you feel as though time has thickened. Inside, the streets are crowded but not chaotic. Every sound has a place. The tapping of a woodworker's chisel on an open porch, the murmur of two women haggling over a bundle of dyed cloth, the occasional bray of a donkey carrying water jars from the river. There is no gold flashing openly here. The wealth of this city is not in show but in motion, in the way goods are moved, weighed, taxed, and stored. The real power lies in ledgers written in ink that will fade long before the memory of the deals they record. This is not the picture most people imagine when they think of Africa's historical empires. They think of grand coronations, of armies in shining armor, of treasures locked away in palaces. But the truth is, what kept these kingdoms alive was not spectacle. It was routine. It was the quiet, repeated, boring work that made sure the market square stayed open, the caravans kept coming, and the storehouses remained full through lean years. And in that sense, it is not unlike the cities you know today. Its survival was held together by the ordinary hands of people you will never read about in any textbook. Somewhere above the street level, inside the shade of a palace courtyard, an aging king is listening to reports. They are not dramatic stories of war or heroism. They are lists of prices, notes on water levels, a reminder that the northern caravan is late again. His advisors speak in measured tones, and each decision he makes will ripple quietly through the markets, the farmlands, and even the distant border villages that know him only by name. You might be tempted to think history is made in moments of noise, but here you can feel that the real weight of it settles in moments like this, where a decision about the price of grain in one season can mean the survival or collapse of a kingdom in the next. If you stood here long enough, you would notice how much of this empire's power depends not on its weapons, but on its ability to keep track of what seems trivial. The great stone walls may impress you now, but it is the bureaucracy behind them that is the true defense. Those gates you pass through are more than an entrance. They are a checkpoint for everything and everyone, ensuring the kingdom's lifeblood of trade continues to flow without interruption. The guards at the gate are not just soldiers. They are accountants with spears, weighing the value of each bundle, noting it down, and sending their records to be stored in archives that might outlive even the palace itself. It is easy to picture yourself wandering deeper into the market, but if you pause, you will notice how the entire city is like a living clock. The call to prayer marks one part of the day, the shadows of the market stalls mark another, the grain sellers arrive at a certain hour, and the fishmongers at another. This order, this rhythm, is what makes the city strong. Without it, the grand walls and the king's wealth would be meaningless. And so, as we step further into the story of Africa's great kingdoms, I want you to hold on to this image, not of a battle or a coronation, but of a city alive with ordinary work, running on the small details that keep history from falling apart. Because in the end, the survival of these kingdoms was as much about the patience to count sacks of grain as it was about the courage to face invading armies. If you were here, watching the slow commerce of the day, what would catch your eye first? The goods being sold, or the people whose lives are woven into every transaction? The morning here does not begin with silence. It begins with layers of sound that rise one by one, folding over each other until they form the steady hum of the city. Somewhere, a cockerel calls before the sun has fully broken the horizon. The first call to prayer drifts from a minaret, its long, measured notes carrying over rooftops still cool from the night. The scent of smoke from small cooking fires begins to drift through the narrow streets. You notice it is not the acrid smoke of green wood, but the softer, warmer scent of dung fuel and dried grasses, a reminder that every scrap in this place is used for something. You might imagine a city like this as restless and chaotic, but the truth is, there is a rhythm to it that you can almost time your breath by. Water carriers move early, before the heat makes their work heavier. They lift their goatskin bags, still damp on the outside, from where they have been filled at the river or the nearest well. The water is not only for drinking, it will be sold to cooks, to dyers, to potters. In the heat of the day, it will cost more. In the early morning, it is a bargain. Street sweepers move through the market lanes, pushing aside the husks from yesterday's grain and the brittle leaves from bunches of greens. This is not charity, it is maintenance. The health of the city depends on removing what could rot in the heat. Their tools are simple: palm brooms bound with strips of leather, a steady pace, and the knowledge that tomorrow they will do it all again. If you follow the sound of wooden mortars thudding in slow, even rhythm, you will find women pounding grain. They are not alone. Children hover nearby, learning the motion, the timing, the feel of the pestle weight in their hands. Some of the grain will become porridge for the morning meal. Some will be stored in large clay jars sealed with mud to keep out pests. A passerby might think this is dull work, but if you have ever seen a city run out of grain, you know it is the difference between life and collapse. In the center of the capital, the market wakes in stages. First come the sellers of hot food, their clay pots bubbling with millet porridge or spiced stews thickened with groundnuts. The smell is a lure for those who work too far from home to return for the midday meal. Then come the traders in raw goods, spices in baskets lined with cloth, salt carved into slabs from desert mines, bolts of cotton dyed in deep indigo. The wealth of the city moves here, not in glittering displays, but in the exchange of things that will be gone by nightfall. You notice the language in the air is not just one tongue. This city is a place where desert traders speak with river merchants, where coastal visitors haggle in accented phrases. Some words are familiar across distances: salt, gold, grain, but many more are shaped by the places they come from. For the city to survive, its people must be able to understand each other, not just in language, but in the value of what they bring. The Palace District is never far from the market, but it feels like a different world. There are fewer sounds here, and most of them are deliberate. The measured footsteps of guards on patrol, the creak of wooden gates opening for an envoy, the soft splash of water in shaded courtyards where small gardens grow. The palace does not store gold in heaps. It stores it in contracts, in grain reserves. in the loyalty of men who can be called to service when the kingdom needs them. Even here, the work is not all ceremony. In one corner of the palace compound, scribes sit cross-legged on mats, writing slowly with reed pens dipped in ink made from soot and gum. They copy records of taxes, of trade goods, of disputes settled by the king's court. These pages are not for decoration. They are tools of memory, the kind that outlast the spoken word. You can imagine that centuries later, a fragment of one of these records might be found, still bearing the neat, deliberate lines of a hand long gone. By midday, the city's rhythm changes. The heat presses down like a weight. Stalls pull down cloth awnings to make narrow strips of shade. Some traders retreat to cool rooms behind their shops, while others remain, knowing that the few customers braving the heat are serious buyers. This is when you notice the stillness of the narrow lanes beyond the main market. The homes here are built close together, their walls thick to keep out the heat. Inside, women weave baskets from palm leaves or twist cotton threads into skeins for dyeing. Children nap in the shade, lulled by the distant sound of traders calling out their wares. And then, as the sun lowers, the city breathes again. The sound of hooves on stone returns as caravans arrive at the gates, their loads covered in dust from days of travel. The guards inspect the goods, counting bundles, weighing them, noting origins and destinations. It is a ritual as old as the kingdom itself, and as necessary as the walls that surround it. The market swells once more, this time with new goods and new stories from the road. The life of the capital is not made of singular events. It is made of patterns, repeated until they become invisible. But those patterns are the threads that hold the fabric of the kingdom together. Without them, the city would unravel. And so you must ask yourself, if you lived here, would you see the greatness of your city in its monuments, or in the small, steady tasks that keep it alive? Long before the first hint of sunrise touches the city walls, the traders are already on the move. You can hear the low murmur of their voices carrying in the darkness, the soft thud of leather sandals on the packed earth, and the occasional grunt of a camel protesting the weight of its load. These are not the flashy processions you might picture from a royal parade. These caravans are practical, efficient, and deliberate, measured not by beauty, but by endurance. The desert does not forgive haste. Each animal is loaded with a careful balance of goods, slabs of salt carved from mines hundreds of miles away, sacks of grain, bundles of dried fish, tightly wrapped cloth, and sometimes gold so finely pounded it can be hidden in the folds of clothing. The traders know exactly where to place each item, so that no one side of the animal bears more weight than the other. A careless mistake could mean a slowed pace, and a slowed pace could mean running out of water before the next well. Beyond the gates, the road is little more than a pale line against the open expanse. Here, distance is not measured in miles, but in the number of nights until the next water source. Wells and oases are lifelines, marked in the memories of the traders who have made this journey for years. Some are guarded by small settlements, others are known only to those who have been shown their location by elders who trust them not to abuse the resource. In this way, the map of the desert is not drawn on paper, but carried in the minds of those who survive it. The wealth of the kingdom depends on these routes. In the capital, merchants exchange goods and coins in a single day. But here in the open stretches, fortunes are built slowly, carried grain sack by grain sack, salt slab by salt slab. A caravan might travel for weeks before reaching its destination, and by the time it returns, the goods it left with have transformed into something entirely different. Salt into gold, grain into cloth, copper into ivory. This slow alchemy of trade is the heartbeat of the empire, steady and patient. Not all routes lead through the desert. To the south, traders move along dense forest paths, carrying kola nuts, ivory, and occasionally rare woods prized for carving. These journeys are slower, the air thick and damp, the rivers sometimes swollen to the point of being impassable. Here, the danger is not thirst but disease, insects, and sudden storms that can strip a camp bare in minutes. Yet the traders still go, because each journey, if successful, brings goods that cannot be found anywhere else. Along the rivers, great canoes carved from single tree trunks carry loads of goods between towns. The paddlers know how to read the water, the swirl of an eddy that might hide a submerged rock, the sudden shift in current that warns of a narrowing channel ahead. River travel is faster than walking, but it has its own risks. A boat laden with too much weight can tip in an instant, sending weeks of work to the bottom. In every case, desert, forest, or river, the key to survival is preparation. Traders carry more than goods. They carry spare rope, small tools for repairs, dried food that can last weeks, and knowledge of who can be trusted along the way. Trust is its own kind of currency here. An agreement between traders to share water or guard each other's camps might seem simple, but it can mean the difference between returning home or vanishing into the landscape without a trace. By the time goods return to the capital, they have passed through dozens of hands. A single piece of cloth may have been woven in one kingdom, dyed in another, and traded for salt in a third before reaching the market stalls you saw earlier. The coins that change hands in the capital are only the final act in a much longer story. The real wealth is not in the glitter of gold or the shimmer of fine cloth. It is in the network of roads, rivers, and paths that make such exchanges possible. And yet, for all their importance, these routes are fragile. A single band of raiders can close a road for months. A drought can make a well run dry. A political quarrel between two distant rulers can cause a border to close overnight, forcing traders to take longer, riskier paths. The kingdom's prosperity depends not just on controlling these routes, but on keeping them open through careful diplomacy, constant maintenance, and the quiet, unseen labor of those who travel them. Standing on the edge of the city, watching a caravan disappear into the distance, you might wonder, when we speak of power, do we mean the ruler on the throne, or the thin, winding roads that carry the lifeblood of the kingdom far beyond its walls? Power here does not arrive in a single moment. It does not sweep into the city like a sudden storm, crashing over the palace walls and changing everything at once. Instead, it builds slowly, often invisibly, until one day it becomes clear that a man who once had to ask for permission now gives it instead. The man who will become king is not always born to the throne. Sometimes he is the nephew of a ruler whose own sons have not survived. Sometimes he is a distant cousin, remembered more for his reliability than his ambition. Sometimes he is a warrior who has shown restraint as well as courage, the kind of man who knows when to hold back his sword. In every case, his rise begins not with a single act of glory, but with a series of quiet decisions that others notice and remember. In the early years, his work is not about commanding armies, but about learning the kingdom's pulse. He walks through the markets without fanfare, listening to traders argue over weights and measures. He sits in the courts where disputes over land are heard, watching how the elders speak, how they measure fairness. He visits the storehouses, not to admire the grain, but to ask the keepers how much has been lost to pests and how much to spoilage. These are not grand gestures. They are the slow gathering of knowledge that will later make his rule stable. Allies are gathered in the same way deliberately, piece by piece. A marriage binds him to a powerful family in the north. A promise of water rights secures the loyalty of a distant settlement. A small but well-timed loan of grain to a struggling village ensures they will remember him when the time comes to choose a leader. Each of these actions might seem minor, but together they form the unseen scaffolding of power. Even in the palace, his presence grows not by decree but by habit. The king begins to seek his opinion on trade disputes. The scribes bring their reports to him first, knowing he will notice mistakes others overlook. When envoys arrive from other kingdoms, they are introduced to him before they meet the ruler himself, as if testing the waters of diplomacy in a safer channel. By the time the idea of his succession is spoken aloud, it already feels natural. The formal transfer of power is not the loudest part of this story. Yes, there will be a ceremony. Yes, there will be drums and dancing and the public placing of the crown or the staff of office. But the real moment of change comes in a quiet room, when the old ruler, perhaps weakened by illness or simply tired from years of carrying the burden, looks at him and says, without flourish, that it is time. When he takes the throne, the city does not transform overnight. The same markets open in the morning. The same guards walk the palace walls. But there is a shift, almost too small to name, in how people speak his name. Traders speak of him as a man who understands the road. Farmers say he knows the seasons. The palace scribes note that he reads their reports carefully, asking questions no ruler before him has bothered to ask. He begins his reign not with conquest, but with reinforcement. He checks the roads to the border towns, sends envoys to reassure allies, inspects the grain stores, and orders repairs to wells that have been neglected. These acts are not dramatic enough to be sung about, but they are the foundation of something that will last. The story of his rise is not the story of a single day. It is the story of years in which small choices, made consistently, have led to this point. And perhaps this is why his rule will be remembered. Not because it began with fireworks, but because it began with work. If you were to rise to power in such a place, would you prefer to arrive suddenly and risk the shock, or to arrive so gradually that when you finally take your seat, everyone already sees you as the one who belongs there? In the records kept by scribes and travelers, the names of kings are written in bold strokes. But in the spaces between those names, in the quiet margins, you will find the traces of women whose influence reached into every corner of the kingdom. Some held power openly, seated in council chambers or leading delegations. Others worked unseen, their authority carried not by title but by necessity. Within the palace walls, the Queen Mother often holds a place of unmatched influence. In many kingdoms, her voice carries weight equal to, or greater than, the king's. She is the keeper of memory, knowing not just the events of past reigns, but the subtle reasons behind them. She can remind a young ruler of the promises made before he was born, or of the debts owed to families whose support is still vital. A king might change his mind after hearing her speak, not because she commands him, but because she reminds him of what cannot be ignored. In the marketplace, women are more than sellers of goods. They are the organizers, the regulators, the ones who ensure that prices remain fair and disputes are settled before they grow. A traveler might see only a row of women selling fish, grain, or cloth. But if you stop and listen, you will hear them speaking in a rhythm that keeps order, announcing prices, weighing goods with practiced hands, settling arguments with a firmness that leaves no room for further debate. In some cities, the market women form associations with leaders of their own, leaders who can influence trade policy simply by deciding which goods to sell and which to hold back. In the fields, women plant and harvest alongside men, their labor feeding not just their families but the soldiers, traders, and scribes who keep the kingdom running. The work is hard and constant. It does not pause for politics or for war. A field must be weeded whether the king sits securely on his throne or faces rebellion at the gates. This steady labor, often unrecorded, is what allows the grand events of history to happen at all. Beyond the fields and markets, some women serve as intermediaries in diplomacy. A marriage can be a treaty in itself, binding two regions together. The women who enter these unions do more than join households. They carry knowledge of both sides, smoothing tensions and keeping lines of communication open when other channels fail. A single conversation in a shaded courtyard can prevent a trade dispute from turning into a border skirmish. Others hold spiritual authority. As priestesses, diviners, or keepers of sacred places, they are consulted before major decisions are made. A ruler may not declare war or change trade laws without first hearing their counsel. Their role is not to command armies, but to guide the thoughts of those who do. The influence is quiet, but it shapes the kingdom's path as surely as any law. Even in times of crisis, women carry responsibilities that cannot be set aside. When a city is under siege, they manage the food supply, rationing grain and water so it will last. When disease strikes, they organize care for the sick, isolating those who must be kept apart and ensuring that children are fed even if their parents fall ill. These are not acts that fill the official chronicles, but they are the acts that determine whether a city survives. The daily choices made by women, whether to store seed grain, when to sell surplus goods, how to settle a dispute, are often invisible in the official history of a kingdom, but without them, the grand titles and ceremonial thrones would stand on empty ground. If you were writing the history of such a place, would you know where to look for the real power on the throne in the palace hall, or in the hands of a woman quietly deciding how tomorrow will begin? A kingdom's survival rests first on its stomach. No matter how high the palace walls rise or how well the army is trained, a year of failed harvests can undo decades of careful rule. In these lands, agriculture is not just the work of farmers, it is the quiet engine of the entire political order. The fields begin their year long before the rains. In the dry season, men and women walk the edges of their land, checking the boundaries marked by stones, trees, or simple ridges of earth. These markers are not merely practical, they carry memory. A tree might stand where an ancestor once made a boundary agreement. A stone might be set where two families resolved a dispute. To move them without consent is not only theft, but a disruption of trust that could last for generations. As the first rains arrive, the earth changes. Dust becomes mud, and the air carries the smell of green things beginning to grow. Sowing begins quickly, before the rains become too heavy. Farmers plant millet, sorghum, rice in wetter regions, and in some areas, beans, ground nuts, and vegetables that will be eaten fresh or dried for later use. The tools are simple wooden hoes, digging sticks, baskets for carrying seed. But the knowledge behind their use is complex, passed down through observation and practice. Farming here is a calculation, one that balances risk against necessity. Plant too early, and the young shoots might die in a late dry spell. Plant too late, and the rains may end before the grain matures. Every household watches the clouds, the wind, and even the behavior of birds and insects for signs of what the season might bring. A mistake can mean hunger, not only for the family that planted the seed, but for the market that depends on their surplus. Storage is as important as planting. Grain is kept in clay silos raised off the ground on stone supports to keep out rats and insects. In some places, the silos are sealed with mud, which is broken open only when the grain is needed. Spoilage is always a danger. A careless crack in the seal can invite moisture, and with it, ruin. In good years, the surplus is enough to feed the city and to sell to traders heading to distant markets. In poor years, the surplus becomes a lifeline, rationed carefully to stretch through the dry months. The king's wealth is measured partly in these reserves. Palace storehouses are not built for show, they are built for emergencies. When famine threatens, the ruler who can open these reserves without hesitation gains loyalty that no gold could buy. Conversely, a ruler who hoards while his people go hungry risks losing not just his throne but the entire stability of the kingdom. Irrigation systems, where they exist, are the quiet marvels of engineering. Channels dug by hand carry water from rivers to fields, sometimes over distances that take days to walk. The maintenance of these systems is constant. A collapsed wall or a blocked channel can destroy a season's crop. Communities organize work parties to clear and repair them, each family contributing labor in proportion to the land they farm. This shared responsibility is not only practical, it is a bond that ties the farmers together in mutual dependence. Food here is never only about survival. It is also about identity. Certain grains are associated with particular regions, certain dishes with specific festivals or rites of passage. A wedding feast might require a type of stew that can only be made when a certain bean is in season. A funeral might call for millet beer brewed in a way that takes weeks to prepare. These traditions ensure that agriculture is not merely an economic activity, but a cultural foundation. Yet, for all its importance, farming is at the mercy of forces beyond human control. Too much rain can rot the grain before it ripens. Too little can turn the earth to dust. Locusts can arrive without warning, stripping fields in a single day. In such times, the resilience of a kingdom depends on its ability to adapt by trading for food from less affected regions, by rationing supplies, or by relying on preserved goods stored for such emergencies. And so, while travellers may remember the grandeur of a city's gates or the splendour of a royal procession, the true strength of the kingdom lies here, in the quiet work of planting, tending, and storing food. Without these rhythms, the city would empty, the markets would close, and the throne itself would sit over an empty hall. If you were to measure the greatness of a kingdom, would you count its soldiers and treasures, or the steady, unbroken chain of meals that keeps its people alive from one season to the next? A kingdom's borders are not lines on a map, they are living edges where trade meets danger. To rule is to defend. Every field of grain, every caravan road, every fishing ground along a river requires protection, because a kingdom's wealth is an invitation to those who would take it. Armies here are not permanent in the way that modern states understand them. In times of peace, most soldiers are farmers, herders, craftsmen, or traders. They are called to arms when the drum signals from the palace, or when a messenger arrives bearing the king's seal. This is not because the rulers are careless about security, but because maintaining a large standing force year-round would drain the very resources it is meant to protect. When war threatens, preparations move quickly. Blacksmiths set aside farming tools to forge spearheads, arrow tips, and the iron fittings for shields. Leather workers stretch and cure hides to make armor or reinforce shield frames. Canoe builders may be called to strengthen river fleets, while weavers produce banners and cords for securing loads. A soldier's weapons are personal. Spears, swords, and bows are kept in good condition, often handed down through generations. Each weapon carries a history of battles fought, of victories and defeats, of the hands that once held it. Shields are more than protection. Their painted patterns declare the soldier's allegiance, and sometimes the deeds of his clan. Defense is not just about battle. It begins with knowing when an attack is likely. Scouts travel the outer edges of the kingdom, watching for unusual movement caravans avoiding the usual routes, smoke in unexpected places, or the silence of a forest where birds and animals should be stirring. Along river crossings, fortified posts keep watch. In mountain passes, narrow trails can be blocked with felled trees or stones, delaying an enemy long enough for the main force to arrive. Some cities are walled. These are not merely high barriers, but systems of defense. Ditches to slow attackers, narrow gates that force entry in single file, and walls wide enough for archers to stand 2 or 3 deep. In places where stone is scarce, walls are made from packed earth reinforced with timber strong enough to withstand a battering ram if well maintained. But walls alone cannot win a war. Armies move with supplies, grain, dried meat, water, and sometimes beer or palm wine to sustain morale. Carriers, often overlooked in the stories of kings, are the backbone of any campaign. Without them, the spears and shields are useless. A force that runs out of food or water will scatter long before it meets the enemy. War is costly, not only in lives but in time lost from the work of planting and trade. A wise ruler avoids open conflict unless the cause is unavoidable. Sometimes tribute is paid to avert bloodshed. Other times, alliances are sealed with marriage or trade agreements. Yet when war comes, it is fought with the knowledge that the survival of the kingdom is at stake. Victory brings its own challenges. Captured enemies must be dealt with, absorbed into the kingdom, ransomed, or enslaved. Fortifications may need rebuilding, and the dead must be buried according to custom. A careless handling of the aftermath can breed resentment that sows the seeds of future conflict. And so, while travellers might speak of the courage of warriors, or the skill of generals. The quiet truth is this: a kingdom's defense is as much about foresight, organization, and supply as it is about the clash of arms. The strongest walls are built not only from stone and earth, but from the discipline and cooperation of those they protect. If you were a ruler here, would you spend more on the army you might need once a decade, or the farms and markets that feed it every day? Power is not only carried on the point of a spear, it is woven into cloth, cast in bronze, carved in ivory, and hammered into gold. In Africa's great kingdoms, the visual language of authority is as important as the laws a ruler makes. The palace is the heart of this display. Its walls may be decorated with reliefs telling the history of the dynasty, great victories, royal processions, the arrival of distant traders. Courtyards are paved with carefully fitted stones or beaten earth, swept clean each morning so the first visitor of the day sees order and prosperity. Goldsmiths are among the most respected artisans. In the forests of the Akan states, delicate filigree ornaments are cast using the lost wax method, each one a miniature sculpture. These are not just decorations. They are worn by chiefs and courtiers as a visible proof of rank. A man draped in gold chains is not merely rich. He is a living statement of the kingdom's control over mines, trade routes, and skilled labor. Ivory carving, especially in coastal kingdoms, produces works that travel far beyond their makers. Portuguese traders of the 16th century carried intricately carved tusks back to Europe, but at home, ivory could become ceremonial staffs, trumpets, or throne decorations. Its pale sheen catches the light in dim council halls, drawing the eye to whoever holds it. Textiles carry messages as clear as banners in the wind. Among the Ashanti, kente cloth is more than a striking pattern. It is a coded language of colours and motifs, each combination telling a story or declaring a status. In the Sahel, indigo-dyed fabrics signal wealth, as the deep blue comes from time-intensive dyeing and multiple dips in the vat. A ruler receiving guests while wearing such cloth is making a silent statement. My resources, like this colour, run deep. Symbols of power also exist in forms that move. Royal regalia might include swords carried in procession, state umbrellas to shade the king, or drums whose rhythms announce his approach before he is seen. These items are never casually handled. Each is assigned to a caretaker whose duty is to keep it in perfect condition, ready for ceremonies that can last hours or even days. Art is not separate from governance, it is governance. A chief's stool, carved from a single block of wood, is not merely furniture, it is a seat of office. When he dies, the stool is blackened and preserved, becoming an ancestral symbol that no one else may sit upon. In this way, the physical object holds not only the memory, but the continuing authority of the ruler. The most skilled craftsmen are often attached to the court itself, their workshops supported by the ruler so that their talents serve the kingdom first. Yet their work can filter down to the wider population. A ceremonial design in gold may inspire a humbler version in brass for a merchant, or in wood for a farmer. Thus, the symbols of power become part of everyday life, reinforcing the idea that the ruler's presence extends everywhere. To an outsider, these works might look like ornaments. To those within the kingdom, they are the physical proof that power is stable, that tradition holds, and that the ruler sits in a line unbroken by time. The artistry is beautiful, but it is also deliberate, a quiet reminder that the kingdom's strength is as much in what it can make as in what it can conquer. If you were a ruler here, what would you commission first? A gold crown for your head, or a woven cloth whose patterns carry your story wherever it is worn? Power in the kingdoms of Africa is not only political, it is spiritual. A ruler's authority often rests on the belief that he is chosen by the ancestors, blessed by the gods, or guarded by the spirits of the land. To govern without this sacred backing would be unthinkable. Religion here is rarely a matter of belief alone. It is woven into the rhythms of the seasons, the success of the harvest, the health of the people, and the peace of the realm. The priest or diviner holds a role as vital as the general. One counsels on military campaigns, the other interprets omens to see if the gods approve. Shrines are everywhere, from the grand temples of Aksum to the smaller earth-packed altars in village courtyards. Some are dedicated to sky gods who control the rains, others to river spirits who guard the waters that sustain life. Offerings, calabashes of grain, bowls of milk, drops of palm wine are made not as mere superstition, but as an exchange in a long, living relationship between humans and the unseen world. Ancestral veneration is at the heart of many traditions. The dead are not gone. They walk with the living, advising and protecting them. Royal ancestors, in particular, are called upon in times of crisis. In Benin, the Oba performs rituals to honor his predecessors, ensuring that their spirits continue to strengthen the throne. The sacred can also be dangerous. Certain objects, iron staffs, carved masks, or sacred stones, are considered so charged with spiritual power that only trained initiates may touch them. A breach of these rules can bring misfortune not only on the offender, but on the entire community. Festivals bind the spiritual and political worlds together. Drums beat through the night, dancers in elaborate masks channel the spirits of the forest, and the ruler emerges to be seen in full regalia. These gatherings renew the bond between the people, their leaders, and the divine. They are also a chance to reaffirm that the prosperity of the kingdom rests on harmony between the visible and invisible realms. In some kingdoms, religion travels alongside trade. Muslim scholars in the Sahel build mosques of mud and timber, their walls supported by great wooden beams that serve both as scaffolding for repairs and as a distinct architectural signature. Christian crosses carved in the rock churches of Lalibela stand as proof that the Ethiopian highlands have been a center of faith for centuries. Yet even when foreign religions arrive, they adapt to the local landscape, merging with older customs. The gods of the rivers, the whispers of the ancestors, and the blessings of the new faith exist side by side, creating a spiritual tapestry as intricate as any royal cloth. To rule here is to navigate not only the politics of men, but the will of the spirits. A wise leader listens to both. The greatness of any kingdom, no matter how vast, eventually encounters the slow, often invisible forces of change. The untold story of decline is rarely sudden or spectacular. It is not a thunderous fall, but a subtle, creeping shifting of fortunes that stretches across decades or even centuries. You stand at the palace once alive with bustling markets, thick with the smell of grain and the shouts of traders. Yet now, the sounds have quieted. The caravans arrive less frequently, their loads lighter, their numbers fewer. The wells, once meticulously maintained, show cracks and slower flow. The once vibrant colours of the cloth fade, replaced by simpler weaves that speak of scarcity. Why does this happen? What unseen threads pull a kingdom toward this slow unravelling? One of the first signs is often economic strain. The trade routes that brought salt, gold, and textiles grow uncertain. Banditry increases along desert paths as central control weakens. Tributary towns, once loyal, begin withholding their dues or shift allegiance to rising rivals. The kingdom's granaries no longer fill as reliably, making it harder for the ruler to reward loyalty or feed the armies. Political tensions grow quieter, but no less dangerous. The alliances that kept the realm together fray under pressure. A marriage alliance fails when a family feels slighted, a distant governor refuses orders, or a powerful noble begins building his own support among disaffected farmers and merchants. Power struggles happen behind closed doors, far from the eyes of the common people, but their consequences ripple out. Environmental factors add their weight. Periods of drought strain the agricultural base. Locust swarms, floods, or soil exhaustion reduce yields. The kingdom's reliance on delicate irrigation systems becomes a liability when repairs are delayed by political distraction or lack of labor. As food grows scarce, so does patience among the population. Religious shifts may accompany this decline. New faiths arrive by trade or conquest, sometimes peacefully, sometimes accompanied by tension. The old spiritual authorities lose influence as new ideas spread. The rituals and festivals that once united people start to lose their meaning or funding. Military challenges mount as well. Neighboring kingdoms or nomadic groups sense weakness and press borders more aggressively. Defensive walls show signs of neglect. Armies, once numerous and well-supplied, shrink as soldiers return to tend their farms or seek fortune elsewhere. The delicate balance of deterrence falters. Yet even in decline, the kingdom does not vanish overnight. Many traditions endure, local leaders adapt, and pockets of resistance or revival appear. Artisans continue their work, religious ceremonies still mark the calendar, and families pass down stories of better times. Sometimes, this endurance becomes the seed of renewal. The slow turning toward decline challenges the very idea of greatness. Is a kingdom's value only in its power at its peak? Or does its legacy lie also in the quiet persistence of culture, knowledge, and identity through difficult times? Standing at the edge of history, you might ask, when the grand monuments fall silent, what remains to tell the story? When the towering walls crumble and the palace halls fall silent, history does not end. Instead, it echoes resonating through the lives of people, stories, and cultures that outlast the kingdoms themselves. You might imagine the great kingdoms vanished without trace, but their influence seeps into surprising places, shaping what came after in subtle and profound ways. Consider the languages spoken across West Africa today. Many carry traces of those kingdoms' administrative and trade languages, words for markets, weights, measures, and governance that survived the rise and fall of rulers. These words might seem ordinary, but they are living relics of a world that was once connected by trade routes, diplomacy, and shared customs. Beyond language, the art and craftsmanship developed in these kingdoms left a lasting imprint. Techniques for metalworking, textile weaving, pottery, and wood carving were passed down through generations, sometimes changing form but rarely disappearing. A weaver in a small village might unknowingly continue a pattern first created centuries ago in a royal workshop. A smith shaping a blade might follow methods perfected in the furnaces of a now ruined city. Even the spiritual beliefs and ceremonies adapted over time, but maintained a thread of continuity. Ancestor worship, sacred festivals, and ritual objects persisted, sometimes blending with new religions or evolving into new forms of expression. These traditions provided communities with a sense of identity and continuity in uncertain times. Trade, too, did not vanish. Though kingdoms faded, the networks that connected forests, deserts, rivers, and coasts remained active. New centers of commerce arose, often in places where old kingdoms once stood, keeping alive the flow of goods, ideas, and people. The salt from desert mines, gold from deep in the earth, and cola nuts from tropical forests continued to circulate, linking diverse peoples in an economic web. Political structures changed but did not disappear. Smaller chiefdoms and city-states often inherited the administrative frameworks of their predecessors. Systems of law, dispute resolution, and leadership that were once centralized became localized, adapting to new circumstances but retaining a familiar rhythm. The careful balance of power between rulers, nobles, and communities remained a key feature of governance. Even the landscapes bear witness. Terraces carved into hillsides for agriculture, remnants of irrigation canals, and the foundations of ancient settlements mark the persistence of human ingenuity. These features continue to shape the lives of farmers and villagers, who may be unaware of their origins but rely on their benefits daily. Some kingdoms left written records, in Arabic script or other forms, that survived the centuries and now serve as precious sources for historians. These documents reveal the complexities of trade agreements, diplomatic correspondence, religious teachings, and legal codes. They remind us that these were literate societies engaged with a wider world, far beyond the borders drawn today. Migration also played a role in preserving and transforming legacies. People displaced by conflict, drought, or economic shifts carried their traditions, skills, and memories with them. As they settled in new areas, they blended their heritage with local customs, creating hybrid cultures that bore the mark of the great kingdoms but adapted to fresh realities. This diffusion of culture and knowledge means that the great kingdoms live on not only in ruins or manuscripts but in the everyday life of millions. The music, dance, clothing, and cuisine enjoyed across vast regions reflect centuries of interaction rooted in those historical states. At the same time, the modern nation-states that now cover much of Africa often struggle to connect with this deep history. Colonial borders cut across old kingdoms, and European narratives sometimes overlooked or simplified African pasts. Rediscovering and valuing the heritage of these kingdoms is a vital step in reclaiming identity and understanding the richness of the continent's history. Scholars, archaeologists, and local communities continue to unearth stories, artifacts, and traditions that challenge outdated views. Oral histories passed down through families provide vibrant and personal insights into lives long gone. These stories, combined with scientific methods, paint a fuller picture of kingdoms once thought lost. You might wonder if the physical kingdoms no longer exist. How do their echoes shape the present? How does understanding this continuity change the way we see the past and the future? The answer lies in recognizing that history is not only about what rulers built or lost, but about the living threads of culture, community, and memory that persist beyond them. When you think of kingdoms, you often picture borders marked clearly on a map, dividing one realm from another. But the reality on the ground is far more fluid. The great kingdoms of Africa thrived not in isolation, but as nodes in networks of exchange trade, ideas, religion, and culture, moving like rivers across the landscape, shaping societies in ways subtle and profound. Imagine a bustling marketplace at the crossroads of these networks. Traders from distant lands arrive, some on camels from the Sahara, others by canoes along the rivers, or on foot through forest paths. They carry more than goods. They bring stories, beliefs, art styles, and technologies. Each interaction is an opportunity for influence, adaptation, and innovation. The introduction of Islam across the Sahel and beyond is one of the most significant cultural exchanges. Brought by traders and scholars traveling ancient caravan routes, Islam spread slowly but steadily from the 8th century onward. This was not an abrupt conquest, but a gradual integration. Local rulers often adopted Islam as a way to strengthen their legitimacy and connect with the wider Muslim world. In turn, Islamic scholars established centers of learning, mosques, and libraries, turning cities like Timbuktu and Gao into renowned hubs of knowledge. Yet, Islam in Africa was rarely a copy of practices elsewhere. It blended with existing beliefs and customs, resulting in unique expressions of faith. The veneration of ancestors continued alongside Islamic prayers. Festivals combined Islamic and indigenous rituals. This fusion created rich, layered cultural landscapes where identity was complex and fluid. Beyond religion, artistic styles traveled along these routes. The bronze casting techniques perfected in Benin influenced metalwork in neighboring regions. Textiles dyed with indigo and patterned in distinctive ways moved between kingdoms, inspiring new designs and weaving methods. Musical instruments and styles spread, transforming ceremonies and social gatherings far from their places of origin. The spread of technologies was equally important. The knowledge of iron smelting, pottery kilns, and agricultural practices crossed ethnic and political boundaries. Farmers in one kingdom might adopt new crops or irrigation techniques learned from neighbors. Blacksmiths shared designs for tools and weapons, adapting them to local needs. These exchanges improved efficiency and helped communities adapt to changing environments. Trade itself was a vehicle for cultural diffusion. Goods like salt, gold, cola nuts, and textiles were not just commodities, they carried with them stories and status symbols. A fine cloth from one region became a prized possession in another, signaling wealth and connection. The movement of these goods often followed established routes, marked by resting points, where ideas were exchanged alongside merchandise. Diplomacy furthered these exchanges. Marriages between royal families forged alliances that brought together different peoples and traditions. Envoys traveling between courts carried gifts, news, and knowledge. Protocols and ceremonies adopted elements from each other's cultures, creating shared languages of power and respect. The influence of external civilizations also shaped Africa's kingdoms. Contact with the Mediterranean world, especially through Egypt and Carthage, introduced new forms of writing, administration, and art. Portuguese and later European traders brought goods, weapons, and ideas that disrupted existing balances but also created new opportunities for exchange. Yet these influences were never one-way streets. African kingdoms exported their own culture and technology. The gold of West Africa fueled European economies. The wisdom of scholars in Timbuktu attracted students from across the Muslim world. Artistic motifs originating in African workshops appeared in distant lands, reminding us that influence flows in all directions. This dynamic process of exchange was never without tension. New ideas challenged old beliefs. Foreign goods disrupted local economies. Alliances shifted as interests changed. But the capacity to adapt, absorb, and transform became a hallmark of these kingdoms, allowing them to thrive in a world of constant movement and change. If you consider the modern world's interconnectedness, it is worth reflecting that centuries ago, these kingdoms were already part of vast networks. Their stories remind us that cultures are never isolated islands, but parts of a living, breathing mosaic shaped by countless interactions. So when you see a cloth pattern, hear a musical rhythm, or taste a spice, ask yourself how many journeys and exchanges brought this to your hands. How many voices and histories are woven into what might seem ordinary? In the great kingdoms of Africa, knowledge was a treasure as valuable as gold or grain. The ways people learned, taught, and preserved wisdom formed a foundation on which these societies were built, often in ways overlooked by outsiders. You might expect that education was confined to a handful of scribes or religious scholars, but the truth is more complex. Learning was woven into daily life, shared through oral traditions, apprenticeships, and formal instruction in both spiritual and practical matters. In urban centers like Timbuktu and Gao, centers of Islamic learning flourished. The Sankore University, for instance, was not a single building, but a network of madrasas where scholars studied theology, law, astronomy, medicine, and literature. Students came from across Africa and beyond, attracted by the promise of knowledge and intellectual debate. Manuscripts were copied, traded, and preserved, many written in Arabic but also in local languages. These texts ranged from religious treatises to scientific observations and poetry, but education was not limited to religious schools. Craftsmanship was taught through hands-on apprenticeships. A young blacksmith would learn to work iron by watching and doing, mastering the subtle skills passed down through generations. Weavers, potters, and farmers passed on practical knowledge essential for survival and prosperity. Oral tradition was the heartbeat of cultural education. Griots, storytellers, musicians, and historians preserved the histories of kingdoms, families, and heroes through song and spoken word. Their stories were carefully structured, combining fact and legend to pass on lessons and values. In societies without widespread written language, these oral histories were vital repositories of collective memory. Education also involved understanding social responsibilities. Children learned not only skills but the customs, rituals, and laws that bound communities together. Elders taught respect for ancestors, the importance of community cooperation, and the subtleties of diplomacy and conflict resolution. The transmission of knowledge was often tied to secret societies or initiation rites. Certain wisdom, whether spiritual, medicinal, or political, was reserved for those who had undergone specific training or rituals. This system helped preserve social order and ensured that sensitive information was handled responsibly. In many ways, knowledge was a source of power. Scholars advised rulers, interpreting religious law or astrology to guide decisions. Skilled artisans controlled technologies that were crucial to defense and economy. Even oral historians wielded influence by shaping the narrative of a ruler's legitimacy or the identity of a people. The resilience of these educational traditions is remarkable. Despite centuries of upheaval, wars, colonialism, and the spread of new religions, many have survived and adapted. Manuscripts once thought lost have been rediscovered. Oral traditions continue to thrive in communities across Africa, preserving a deep connection to the past. The story of education in these kingdoms challenges simplistic ideas about literacy and learning. It reminds us that knowledge takes many forms, and that societies develop systems suited to their own realities and needs. When you think about how knowledge shapes your world today, consider how these ancient systems of learning built the foundation for cultures and communities that endure still. Trade was the lifeblood that coursed through Africa's great kingdoms, a force that connected distant peoples, shaped wealth, and wove the fabric of everyday life. When you picture these kingdoms, it's easy to imagine armies or kings, but beneath the surface, complex systems of commerce drove much of their power and survival. The trade routes, whether stretching across deserts, threading through forests, or winding along rivers, were arteries of exchange. Salt from Saharan mines traveled south to nourish both bodies and economies. Gold from the forests journeyed north to eager markets beyond the seas. Cola, nuts, spices, ivory, and textiles moved in caravans led by traders whose knowledge of geography rivaled any scholars. Yet trade was never merely transactional. Goods carried stories, alliances, and status. A beautifully crafted cloth or a rare metal ornament symbolized far more than wealth. It represented relationships between rulers, families, and communities. The appearance of a foreign object in a marketplace might signal a new connection, a shifting alliance, or an emerging power. Markets were vibrant hubs, not just for buying and selling, but for information exchange. Merchants and locals gathered, sharing news from distant lands, gossip from royal courts, and practical knowledge about seasons, weather, and travel conditions. These interactions kept kingdoms informed and adaptable. The economy was diversified. Agriculture remained central, but craftsmanship flourished, producing goods for both local use and export. Blacksmiths, potters, weavers, and leatherworkers formed guilds or associations that maintained quality and regulated trade practices. Their labor supported both the daily needs of citizens and the grandeur of the court. Taxes and tribute were vital to sustaining kingdoms. Tribute could be paid in goods, grain, livestock, gold, or services like military support. These systems were complex and often negotiated, reflecting the delicate balance of power between rulers and their subjects. A king depended on this flow to fund administration, religious ceremonies, and defense. Trade was also linked to diplomacy. Agreements often involved not just exchange of goods, but guarantees of safe passage, mutual defense, or political support. Failure to honor such agreements could result in raids, embargoes, or shifts in allegiance. Merchants sometimes acted as unofficial diplomats, their movements and dealings creating webs of influence. However, trade was vulnerable. Disruptions, whether from war, environmental changes, or shifting political alliances, could ripple across kingdoms. A blocked caravan route meant lost income and strained resources. A new rival controlling a key trading city could redirect wealth and power, altering the balance between kingdoms. The arrival of Europeans added new layers to these dynamics. Portuguese, Dutch, and later British traders introduced new goods, weapons, and demands. While these contacts sometimes brought prosperity, they also introduced competition, exploitation, and conflict, reshaping traditional trade networks. Despite these pressures, African kingdoms showed remarkable resilience. They adapted their economies, embraced new goods and ideas, and maintained trade networks that spanned continents. The legacy of these systems continues today in vibrant markets and commercial traditions across the continent. If you think about the goods you use daily, consider the journeys they might have taken and the histories woven into their paths. The story of trade in Africa's great kingdoms is a reminder that economy and culture are inseparable, and that commerce has always been a human story of connection and survival. Leadership in Africa's great kingdoms was never simple. It was a balancing act of power, tradition, diplomacy, and daily management that required more than force. It required understanding the complex weave of society itself. You, standing in the shadow of a royal court, might be surprised how much the ruler's strength depended on relationships and unseen agreements. Kings and queens often inherited their position through lineage, but legitimacy came not only from birth. Rituals, ceremonies, and spiritual approval were essential to confirm their right to rule. Without the blessing of ancestors, priests, or diviners, even the most powerful noble risked losing support. The throne was as much a sacred seat as a political one. The ruler was the ultimate judge, lawmaker, and commander. But governance was shared with councils of elders, nobles, and sometimes religious leaders. These groups advised the monarch, checked abuses of power, and represented different interests within the kingdom. Decisions were rarely unilateral. Consensus and negotiation played crucial roles. Justice was a key pillar of leadership. Laws covered everything from property disputes and trade regulations to moral conduct and ritual observance. Courts operated at multiple levels, from village gatherings to the royal palace, and rulings were grounded in custom as well as codified statutes. The respect for law upheld order and prevented chaos. Maintaining loyalty was a constant task. Gifts, marriages, public ceremonies, and titles were tools rulers used to secure alliances and reward service. Nobles and officials who managed provinces or towns needed to feel connected to the center of power, yet also capable of autonomy. Too much control could breed rebellion, too little could lead to fragmentation. Communication across the kingdom was vital. Messengers carried decrees and news, but also rumors and grievances. The ruler had to stay informed about distant regions, responding to crises, disputes, or threats. This required a network of trusted agents, from local chiefs to spies. Leadership extended to economic management. The king controlled trade routes, collected taxes, and regulated markets. His ability to ensure prosperity affected his standing. A ruler who could distribute food in times of famine, build infrastructure, or sponsor festivals gained popular support and reinforced his image as provider and protector. Religion intertwined with governance. The king often acted as a religious leader or intermediary, performing rituals to secure divine favor for the realm. This sacred role strengthened his authority, making rebellion not just a political act but a spiritual offense. Yet leaders faced constant challenges. Rival factions, external enemies, environmental crises, and internal dissent tested their skill and resolve. Some rulers adapted with wisdom and flexibility, while others fell to intrigue or misjudgment. The fate of a kingdom often hinged on the delicate art of leadership. The lives of ordinary people were shaped by these decisions, laws enforced, taxes levied, peace maintained. The ruler's success or failure touched every household, every field, every marketplace. So when you think of a king or queen in these kingdoms, remember they were not distant figures of legend, but active participants in a complex social web. Their power was real but fragile, sustained by customs, competence, and constant negotiation. What does leadership mean when every choice echoes through a vast, diverse society? How do rulers balance tradition with change, authority with responsibility? These questions remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago.